Hey everyone, welcome back to the Hampton Roads Real Estate Network. Today I am sitting again with Deanna Ashton with AFN Mortgage, and we're going to talk about veteran home buying. And specifically, we're going to talk about PCSing and the pitfalls that are common when we are in the middle of a move. Our veteran clients have a lot of unique challenges. So we're going to get away from talking about VA loans a little bit. Now, we've had a few sessions with that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about our personal experiences, both with PCSing ourselves. I was a Coast Guard kid. So growing up, I moved like every 2 to 4 years, so my family went through it many times. And even as a young man, even though I didn't serve in the military, I moved a lot in my young life. So I totally understand a lot of the struggles and the annoyances of moving. And then I know, Deanna, being a military spouse yourself, you've PCS quite a handful of times, right?
Yes, we've definitely experienced it a few different times, and we've done it with kids, without kids. We've done it with my husband going ahead of us and us following later. But I've also served as an husband, Melva MBRG, so I have a lot of background information on what are best practices and what are some things you can do to hopefully make it less stressful for you and your family.
That sounds good. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the specific things that you can do to make things go smoother in preparation. And I'm going to share a couple of stories that I have from the realtor side about things that I've seen and people that I've worked with that will kind of highlight some of the things that people have gone through. And so hopefully our audience can learn from them and avoid them themselves, and they can understand a little bit more about what's involved. Maybe they haven't gone through it yet, or maybe they've only done it once or twice. And even if you've gone through it many times, there's always something that you can learn because new situations come up all the time with these kind of moves, right?
Yes, definitely. And every move is different depending on, where you're going, if you're purchasing, if you're renting, if you're having to also sell a house. There are a lot of different factors that can affect it. So I think that this will be really good information for people to take some real life experiences and hopefully make adjustments if they need to for their own plans.
Yeah, awesome. Do you want to start off with one of your items that you wanted to touch base with as far as PCSing goes?
Sure. I think one of the biggest questions that I get as someone is PCSing, especially if they're coming from somewhere that's a little bit further away, is when should I actually start the process if I want to purchase a home? When we do our applications and we do a credit pull, that pre approval, as long as you're not opening new credit or income and things don't change, it's good for 4 months. But that doesn't mean you have to wait until right before you're getting ready to move. So we can do soft credit pulls. We can give you an idea of what closing costs might be in your area. And we can also, more importantly, help connect you with a realtor like Ryan who has experience in Hampton Roads where you're going to. It can help give you an idea of where you might want to look. So it's never too early to start preparing. If you do happen to find out, what just happened to us, that you don't have a lot of time between getting your orders and when you have to be there, I would say at least give yourself 2 to 3 months minimum from the time that you start the pre-approval to make sure that whether it's in person or virtual, you can have those conversations and feel comfortable with your realtor and make sure that, if Ryan's helping you, you're getting to look at the houses you want to look at and get a really good handle on the area. Because it's always different, going into the new area and you've never been there before and figuring out where might be a good place to go. And Hampton Roads is so diverse too.
Mhm. Yeah, that's very true. And I think something you touched on is really important about your comfort level with your real estate agent. It takes time to develop that. And especially if you're coming from a completely different part of the country, like maybe from California to Hampton Roads is very common. You're going to do a lot of things virtually, and you're going to work with that real estate agent very closely, and you have to have a lot of trust. The most complicated one that I ever worked on, my people actually were moving from Spain. So they're coming all the way from across the pond, as they say. And so there's a huge time difference that you got to work around. And another thing that you said reminded me of another really important thing that you have to keep in mind. is timeline. Timelines with military change, they either shorten or they can extend suddenly. And that was one of the particular things that in this case, their timeline got extended multiple times. And so I was just going to talk a little bit about that experience helping them move from Spain. And the first thing I want to go back to is trust. They put a lot of trust in me as their real estate agent. And they did the entire process virtually, actually. So, and
Wow,
I mean,
that's crazy.
yeah, and I mean the whole process from showing homes to closing. They didn't even move back to the States until after they had closed, which was not the original plan. So they had to do quite a bit of adjusting and they had to be flexible and they had to trust me to navigate a lot of things that came up. Of course, like you were saying, being comfortable with your real estate agent moving to a new area is first thing that you got to be comfortable with. And that's the thing that I think most people are naturally going to become comfortable with. Your real estate agent should be an area expert. They should be giving you trustworthy advice about areas and know what you're looking for. But it is something that is the first hurdle that you're going to have to overcome. And moving from a far away place like Spain, there was a huge time gap. And so I had to do showings, really early in the morning sometimes, like just kind of at odd hours that adjusted to their schedule. And I was working with the wife mostly, as I find that happens a lot because usually if it's the husband that's in the service, then they're either deployed or they'll frequently go out on patrol. Anyway, so we started off like you do, and we were showing homes and they were learning about the area. And so that is the building the rapport early on is really important because you could be working together for a long time, which is what happened in this case. So eventually, we found a house that they liked and it seemed to work. And, like I said, we had to do the showings virtually. But then once we got it under contract, we're doing the home inspections virtually too. So they knew that they weren't going to be able to see the home in person once they, made an offer on there. They
Yeah.
already had that in their mind. So that's something that we had to navigate. And I did the whole home inspection virtually on my phone so that, we were looking at things with the inspector. I work with some really great home inspectors, and this guy in particular, his name is Robert Smith with American Home Inspections, and he was really great. He was fine with being on camera, asking or answering questions that they had as the home inspection went
Mhm.
on, and so we did the whole thing virtually. It was like I try to make it as if they were there as much as possible. So for most of the home inspection, they were on camera. We were touring the house again, because most people want to go, when they do the home inspection, it's another time for them to actually go see the house. And since they didn't really have that opportunity because they were in Spain, you know, I tried to give them that experience as closely as I could. So the home inspection went through and the house was in great shape. So there wasn't really a whole lot of concerns. And so that was not a big deal. But maybe, I don't know if this has ever happened to you while PCSing yourself, but often, the husband went out on patrol and was not in communication anymore. And so while we're trying to do all the closing documents and negotiate with the seller, sometimes he would basically go dark. Right. And, there was no communication. So we had to wait on replies and signings and stuff like that. Is that something that you guys had to deal with?
Yeah, we definitely dealt with that. I mean, I've dealt with that on I'm being a lender, and I've definitely dealt with that as a military spouse. So my husband's on sun. So when they're gone, like they're gone. And the schedule can change very, very quickly. And of course, there's no communication. If there is email, it can be spotty. So a lot of times what I try to tell people to plan, especially if you're at a duty station or you're at a command where there is ever a possibility, whether it's training, whether it's deployment, whether it's going out to sea, whatever it may be, definitely get your power of attorneys. They're good for an entire year if you get them in the beginning of the process. Make sure they are specific power of attorneys. We work with a lot of Navy here, but we have, military, different military here as well. I know you can get them from your Yeoman's office here, your XO's office if you're in the Navy, and it takes like 10 minutes.
Mm,
You also want to make sure that when you get your power of attorneys, you want to get them early on because your lender needs to review the underwriting and closers for there, and also your title company attorney, whoever's doing the closing for you. So that's just one thing that you can do ahead of time. And if you don't need it, I mean, it's fine. You just have it, but
yeah.
it's something you can do ahead of time to hopefully just ease your mind, not just for the spouse, the parent, the partner, whoever's left behind, but also for that service member to know that while they're out on patrol, out to sea, whatever it might be, that you can access everything that you need to access. And
Yeah.
also be sure that, I don't know if this was the situation for your buyer, but if they have to access funds and they're not on the account, if they have to wire funds for closing, any of those things that can come up. And that's why it's so important, like you were saying, to build that trust. You got to find a great realtor you can work with. You need to find realtors and lenders that have the foresight of what could happen because they have these experiences and can kind
Yeah.
of walk you through it so you know what to expect. And that they can connect you with people like your inspector, that they understand. Sometimes people are going to do a video inspection. They're open to that. There are some inspectors that don't like that. The person who inspected our house when we bought it here and we were moving locally almost seemed annoyed that we were even in the house while the inspection was happening,
Oh
right?
no.
So you want to work with people that understand the situation. They're aware that you work with military clients. And the only way to do that is to find, a really good lender who's had experience with that. So I think that's awesome that you were able to do that for them.
Yeah, you brought up another thing. So continue on with the story that became a really major issue was that his orders got extended. And
Mhm.
so they were planning on closing after they had gotten back to the United States, of course, right? Most people want to see the house before they actually buy it. And so
Yeah.
the timeline initially was lining up really nicely, but they ended up having to stay in Spain a little bit longer than they anticipated. And so that led to the issue of virtual closing, which not every lender will do. The title
Mhm.
companies are flexible with it, but not every lender is open to that. They want a in-person wet sign, as they call it.
Mhm.
So luckily, we were working with a lender that was willing to do that. And I had to negotiate with the seller quite a bit during this time frame. And luckily, there's also a secondary story in this about this guy was actually representing himself. He wasn't using um, an agent himself. There's a secondary story here where you shouldn't do that, and there's a
Yeah.
cautionary tale underneath that, but we won't get into that because that's a different issue. But he basically was negotiating with me directly because he was representing himself, and our timeline changed, but then he messed up his timeline too because he was moving to Washington, D.C. And he was trying to plan everything, the move, and he was buying a house up there and everything. And he messed that up. So we had to extend it even more because of him. And there's timeline issues all over the place with this one from the
Yeah.
buyer having to close virtually, transfer funds, and all those things that we had to navigate with the closing company and the lender. But then he's trying to buy a house up in Washington. So he has to close on the house that they're buying first. Right.
Right.
And then he's got to use that money and he's got to transfer those funds to buy the next house. So there's a timing issue that kept getting bumped and moved. And it turned out to be very beneficial to my buyers actually because of his timeline challenges and not being able to find a house as soon as he thought. He was also working with time constraints with his daughter going to school up there because he was moving and you're trying to get them in school and their school calendar was different. So he had to move faster than he thought, which actually put our deal in jeopardy. So he ended up giving the buyer closing cost assistance on top of the closing cost assistance he was already offering because
Oh,
he was putting them in a position where they had to push closing out longer than they wanted to. And so they were and they wanted to because of their timeline changes, they wanted to extend closing out longer so that they
mhm.
could be back in the States before closing.
Yeah.
Right. But then he had to close sooner. He's like, no, I can't do that. I gotta close before then. and he was in the military himself, so he was really understanding, but he
Yeah.
messed up his timeline. He's like, "I have to be in DC by this date," so he basically was like, "How can we make this happen?" I'm representing the buyer. I was like, "Well, maybe like an extra $5,000 might, help
Yeah. Oh,
convince them."
exactly. And
So
it's so awesome that you had that experience and that I think we set the expectations with our military clients, not just that we have the experience, but just like these are the things that have to happen in the process as far as the home buying, as far as the loan, as far as title, as far as the inspection. And when we set those expectations, you know, things can come up, but they're not a surprise. And like being a
yeah,
military spouse myself, you grew up in the military, you know about having to be flexible, you know about hurry up and wait. And so we're kind of accustomed to like, yeah, things are just, it's not going to be smooth because there are outside factors. You can't control if something changes with your orders or, something happens in transit.
yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, in summary, basically, everything went well, and they ended up closing, and they, moved back to the house, so we navigated all the issues. They ended up getting more money than they were anticipating, and it worked out beautifully because at the end, their closing costs were more than they were expected, and they actually needed that money. So it
Yeah.
ended up working out, so that everything could close smoothly. And then we got all the funds transferred on time, and the seller closed on his house, and everybody was happy at the end. But that turns me to an experience that I had that wasn't so happy, and it was not my buyers. It was somebody that I had come into contact through an investor of mine because he was talking to these people who wanted to sell their house off market directly to him. And they were telling him their story, and they didn't have a lot of equity in the house, but the husband was in the Marines, and he was being transferred, and his wife was actually moving back to California because he was going to some base, some island somewhere. I can't remember, but she couldn't go with him. So it was a complicated situation, and they had just recently bought this house. And he was like, "Hey, can you come with me? And I'm going to go check out this house and just see what their situation is and see how we can help these people." So I went up there. It was up in Newport News, and we got to the house. Nice neighborhood, really nice little house that they had, and they were showing me around the house, and there was things that needed to be done. There was, a lot of do-it-yourself projects from the previous
Yeah.
owner that were rough. And then there was one spot in the roof that was leaking that had never gotten repaired. But the more we started digging into these people's situation, they had bought this home very similar to my people who moved from Spain that I had helped, except their agent did not do a good job for these people. They did everything virtually, just like the people moving from Spain did, but their home inspection was done virtually, and none of the items that they requested were repaired. They showed me their home inspection report, they showed me their documents, and the agent told them that all the issues were fixed, but the issues were still there. You could look at the report and you could look at the house. It's like, yeah, they didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So that was one major issue where they trusted their real estate agent. She did not do a good job there. They also really overbought the house, and their agent put them in a situation, particularly for people in the military. This happens a lot. You get orders, as you know, and things change, and all of a sudden you have to sell or rent out your house sooner than you anticipated originally. And in this agent's defense, it was during 2022, I think 2021, 2022, or whatever, and everything was selling high and selling fast. And so
Yeah.
I understand why they bid over on the house. Everybody was doing it back then, but they bid like $40,000 over on this house, and
Wow.
knew that they were in the military, and if they moved in 2 years, they would not have the equity.
Yeah.
And in the listing agent explained that this house needed work. It was right there. It said it needed about $20,000 worth of work and was priced
Yeah.
accordingly. And then they bid $40,000 over. So they doubled how much money over to buy the house that was said needed work in the house. And then they didn't get
Yeah.
anything from their real estate agent as far as closing cost assistance or repairs. So they
Uh,
were really in a
you're
bind.
right.
And that unfortunately happens to people in the military because if they had stayed in the house for 4 or 5 years, if they were basically still living there, eventually they would have been okay, right?
Yeah.
Because of the order change, they were in a bind, and we had to come up with a creative deal to get them out of that situation. And now they moved on and, they got out from under the house and everything worked out okay. But, unfortunately, uh, I see that, working with investors not uncommonly, which is,
Yeah.
it made me really kind of upset actually when I was in the situation and looking at the details, and the realtor really kind of screwed them.
Yeah, and it's difficult because a lot of times people don't realize, when you're the home buyer, it is your right to interview different lenders, to interview different realtors, to ask for reviews. A great thing to do is if you already know friends or family that have moved in that area, maybe ask around to them. And you can also choose your own home inspector. You can request if work was supposed to be done. I mean, the realtor, and I've never seen a case where a realtor didn't say, you can get this re-inspected because it doesn't matter what the realtor says. The inspector can go out and look at those
Mhm.
items and they send you a full report with pictures and that kind of thing. So
Yeah,
again, it goes
great
to
point.
finding people that you can trust that are going to go that extra mile to make sure that you are protected. Another thing that's kind of a sidebar too is when you're buying a house sight unseen, maybe you want to discuss some of those things when you're looking at insurance, when you're looking at possibly getting a warranty. I mean, there are also
Mhm.
other things that you can do, which I know people have mixed feelings about warranty, but depending on what that report says, I mean, feel free to speak with your realtor about those questions because if you're not there to see the house, and they're able to see the house and have the report, they may be able to give you, different insights. So,
Yeah,
you know, keep that in mind. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that, you're buying a house, so you can ask questions. You can back out. You can look at a house and get
yeah,
the inspection report and find something else. So find someone that understands working with military clients, the situation that you're in and the importance of making sure that whether your goals are to stay in the house for a few years and rent it or buy a house and sell it or keep it long term or whatever, that they're considering that too when
yeah.
you're going through the process.
Yes, great points, and the number one thing that I would say to anybody really, but especially veterans moving into this area, don't ever feel like your real estate agent is just trying to sell you a home. Because I
Mhm.
can guarantee you in that situation with the Newport News house, that's what was happening. That agent was just
Yeah.
trying to get the deal done. She glossed over the stuff that wasn't done in the home inspection. And you're absolutely right. That's a great point. You can ask for a reinspection of the items, and you should. If you're not there, if you're not present and you don't, or even if you are and you're just not confident, or if it's stuff that you can't see, like if it's crawl space stuff, that's things that those are things that have come up before in my experience as well, as like things that were supposed to be fixed weren't fixed, and they're in areas that aren't easily accessible. So if those situations come up, it might cost you another $100 or whatever for your home inspection, but it could save you a lot of money and headaches down the
Yeah.
road. And another thing you brought up, which I think is a good point, is home warranties. People do have mixed feelings about them, but me personally, I think that a home warranty is a good thing to have for buyers if you have a good policy. And I guarantee home warranties to all my buyer clients now. I will either negotiate it in the deal so that the seller pays for it, or I will pay for a year warranty myself for my buyers because I
Oh,
think it's
that's
really,
awesome.
yeah. And I started doing that because after doing this for a few years and seeing some of the things that we see, I want people to feel as confident as possible about their purchase. And I think a home warranty is one way to do that. Um, so that is something that I have started doing at the start of this year is offering all my buyer clients home warranties no matter what.
Yeah, that's
Reasonable.
awesome.
But
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, like you said, some people are going to kind of just sell you the home or sell you the mortgage, but you're going to be the one paying for the house. I mean, you're the
yeah,
one you're going to be responsible if something breaks. You have to really think about the decision, and it's not to scare people and just to make sure. Like, I never want to be in a situation where someone purchases a home and I do their loan and I'm not doing my best to make sure that they understand the entire process. I mean, I've had clients come to me that have worked with other lenders and they didn't even realize they had to have home insurance. I mean, and that's
yeah,
part of your monthly payment. So really make sure that that comfort level is there with everyone you're working with. And it's great if you can find a lender or a realtor you drive with and you can't find one or the other. If you're working with someone local, they're going to be able to find you a great realtor,
yeah,
lender, inspector, title company, whatever it might be, because, we're doing this all the time. And so we have a lot of experience with people who are local that you can easily get in touch with if you have questions about anything, any part of the process.
yeah. And luckily, because of the area that we live in, most professionals around here are used to working with veterans.
Mhm.
Some of them do it more so than others, but even working with someone, if you're the buyer, and working with a listing agent that also has experience in that is really beneficial. So even knowing that is really important because I worked with a seller who sold their home to someone who was moving into the area and she was serving on a ship and she was actively on the ship the entire time in the process. And that
Oh,
brings
wow.
me and yeah, and so obviously there's communication issues just like with the family out in Spain, but this person it was even more so because she didn't have somebody, on the mainland, communicating with her real estate agent. It was just her buying from the ship, so communications would dark, negotiations would take longer than normal because we were waiting for, emails to be sent back and forth.
Yeah.
And working with a buyer agent that understands that is important, but also working with the listing agent that understands that is important. So your agent should be, warming up the listing agent and saying like, hey,
Yeah.
like my person's deployed. So we have to have a little bit of understanding going into
Mhm.
this. And luckily, unless the seller has like some kind of like constraint that they have to move very quickly or something, they might not want to do that. But for the most
Yeah.
part, most people understand this and it can be navigated. And I brought this situation up because you had talked about power of attorney. One thing that this person could have done is get that power of attorney secured before they went under contract because she
Yeah.
ended up having to use power of attorney to close the deal with her father. And they had to arrange all that while she was out on the ship, which
It's a lot harder to do
a lot
that.
more.
You also want to make sure, like I said, the power of attorney, it has to be reviewed by the closing company, by the lender. And you also, I mean, I actually had someone that closed while they were out to sea on a submarine. So talk about like zero
Mm,
contact. They had
yeah.
zero contact. And this person didn't have any family close by that could easily access funds if he needed to. So he actually had a friend that did it for him and it went fine. And then we knew what we needed to have ahead of time. We had one document that came up that the VA usually requests, which is a statement of service letter. But luckily, because he was on subs and we've been here now for almost 7, 8 years, I actually have a number for the squadron office. So I was able to just call them and say, hey, I need this. I'm the lender. Here's the borrower's authorization showing that I am able to request this type of information. And they emailed me the letter within like 2 hours and then sent it to the underwriter for review. So that those the two things, being prepared, having the power of attorney, and working with someone who is connected in the military community, knows how to get what you need, and also anticipating, right, what you might have to have so that you can hopefully avoid that. Because, we're working with military clients like constantly, you and
Yeah.
I, we can sort of anticipate based on timeline where they are, where they're coming from, what their pain points are, what are the things that we need to take care of, right away. So I
Yeah.
think it's great that you're able to provide such a full encompassing service because there might be agents who say, well, I don't have to be there for an inspection. So no, I'm not going to follow the inspector around for an hour and make sure that you can look into every single room, take measurements if you want me to, or give you an
Mhm.
honest feedback
Yeah.
on what they are seeing. Because a lot of times houses look great when you look at pictures, but
Yeah.
maybe it can be a different story once you walk inside.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that sort of stuff does happen. You should ask your agent, "Are you gonna be there for the home inspection?" Because I
Mhm.
know agents that, like you said, will skip it. They'll just send the inspector out there, give them access to the house, and they say, "Do your inspection," because my client's not even in town, so why should I have to show up? But I
Yeah.
think that it's important that you do show up and see for yourself. Do a video call if your clients are able to during the inspection. Ask the inspector questions just as if they were there themselves
Mhm.
because it's not the same thing, but it's the best thing to it. And
Right.
why wouldn't you want that as your buyer? So you don't want those kind of things, especially the home inspection. You don't want those things glossed over.
Right.
You want to be able to ask questions. So that's super important. I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah,
Do you
I
have
think
anything else
so.
that you wanted to touch base with before we sign off here?
Now, just want to encourage people if they're looking to buy and they're PCSing, ask the questions early. Even if, I've had buyers that have ended up saying, well, I'm going to come and maybe I'll rent for a few months, or I'm staying with a friend, my family's staying behind, and then, I'll do it. Just ask questions. You can get started without having to do the whole formal process. You can interview people, you don't know sometimes what you don't know. And when you're moving into a new area, don't be discouraged by hearing some of these stories, because a majority of the stories are smooth. The majority of the stories
Yeah.
are great experiences, but we're just kind of giving you this so that you can hopefully use that to think about moving forward. What is the best what are some options for you? So you can ask questions early and ask
Yeah.
questions often.
Yeah, I don't share the bad stories to scare people. I share them to educate people because, like you said, most transactions go off without a hitch and they're very
Yeah.
smooth. Even some of the issues that pop up, which they inevitably do, get resolved and it's
Yeah.
okay. But unfortunately, some bad things can happen. So you need to be aware of that. You need to be an educated and informed consumer because that's what you are when you're buying a home.
Yeah.
You are borrowing a lot of money and you're buying a significant investment in, your financial stability. So that's a good thing. Those are all good things. But if it goes wrong, it can really mess things up for you. And you don't want to be
Yeah.
in that situation. And you want a real estate agent who understands that and is looking out for your best interest and a lender that is also doing the same thing. So,
Yeah.
um, thanks for joining me today. It was a pleasure as always. If anybody has any questions, our contact information will be in the description below. I also have a link that you can schedule a discovery call with me if you have any questions about the area, moving to Hampton Roads, anything in general about the buying or selling process if you own here already. You can reach me using that and schedule a call with me, or you can call or email Deanna using her contact information below. We also have our social media accounts down there too, so you can follow us, get to know us a little bit if you want to do that as well. So until next time, thanks for joining us, and we will see you later.
See you later.